Hello again. Here we are with the second of my videos talking about my books and some of the excitement that I share with all of you in it. Some of it I wasn't, well, some of it was a little too exciting at the time, but maybe it will help you think if you're ever in a dangerous situation or something. I think about all these young women that are always vanishing. Some of them through some really stupid things. I don't know why they aren't thinking. Maybe they need to watch the evening news more and see what's lurking out there. But it was 1962, and we were living in San Mateo, California, and I was going to be driving back to the University of Kentucky. I had a car, and I took my car with me, and driving back for my senior year. My sister was also at UK at that time, and so we're going to back the trip together. And a friend of my parents said, well, their son needed to go to school in Illinois. If we could get him to St. Louis, then he would take the train on up. And we thought, hey, that's great. This gives us another body if we need one, share some expenses, what have you. So we start off driving across California, which is a trek in itself. And then we were going through Arizona, and we come to New Mexico, and this is our second night out there. So we drive into a little town called Tucumcari. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. It was on the old Route 66. And even today, I looked it up to see whatever happened to it. I was hoping it had blown away in a dust bowl, but it's still there with about 6,000 population. And also, for those younger ones in the audience, back in the 60s, when you were driving across country, you didn't have wonderful Marriotts and Hiltons and Sheratons and whatever you, and breakfast ready for you, and a mini bar in the room or whatever. You had these one-story, maybe sometimes two-story, little motels that looked like they came right out of a film noir movie, think Psycho or something like that. And no amenities. And you never knew what you were going to get. And there were not many big chains at that point. So we drive into Tucumcari, and it's a small town. And, you know, with that small 6,000 people, it's not going to be very big. And on the way in, we see this motel on the right, and it was little cabins, and it looked okay. You know, you never knew in those days anything about these places for the most part. So we decide to go get two cabins, one for John and one for Betsy and me. We discovered when we got in the cabin, there was no phone in the room. And I think the man went home at 8 or 9 o'clock. He figured he'd rented what he was for the night, and he left, so there's nobody around and no phone. So we're kind of isolated, even though we're, you know, I guess there might have been some other guests around. I can't remember. So it was dinner time, and we were hungry. And we drive into the downtown area, and the downtown was maybe, I don't know, 2 miles long or something. It wasn't real big. But we go down and we find a diner, a little restaurant, cafe, whatever it was, and we go in for dinner. Well, every night when we stopped, we would take turns calling either John's mother or our parents to let them know where we were and how our trip was progressing. So while we're there waiting for the dinner to come to us, my sister goes out to call our parents on the payphone. No cell phones back then either, y'all. It was really the dark ages. So there's a payphone right outside this little restaurant. And while she's on it, my sister was a very pretty blonde. She used to model, and she was very, very pretty blonde. And we were like 20, she was 20 and I was 22. And so she gets on the payphone. Well, while she's out there, these two cars of boys about, you know, late teens, early 20s, somewhere in the close to our range, were driving by, and they stopped and they were whistling and all that. She'd ignored them. She's talking to our parents, and, you know, they keep driving around the block and trying to get her attention. So when she gets through, she comes back in, and we eat dinner, and then we leave to go back to this motel. Well, when we get to the motel, I just happened to look out the window. Now, remember, we're in two cabins. John's toward the back, we're in one toward the street. And I see these two cars with these boys in it sitting out front of our motel. And that made me very nervous. It's dark. We have no phone. We know nobody there. And the man who runs it has gone wherever he went at night. So I told my sister, I'm not comfortable staying here. We don't have any defense. Get your stuff back together. Let's get everything in the car. I'll go get John. So I run and knock on his cabin. He opens the door draped in a towel. He said, I'm in the shower. I said, never mind, get your clothes on, wet or dry. We are leaving right now. So he grabs his stuff up, and I said, we just can't stay here. We have no protection. And we start driving back in through the town because we were on the outer edge. We're going into it. And as we're driving along, I happened to see a sheriff's car parked close to the street we're on, but he was on a side street. So I whipped around and jumped out, and I went over and I said, Sheriff, I think we need some protection. We're traveling through town, and these boys were following us, and they followed us to our motel, and I don't feel safe. And so he's starting to get the information when those two cars come driving up, and they jump out, and the sheriff's, oh, hi, so-and-so, hi, John, hi, Kevin, whatever. And it turned out he knew them very well. And he looks at me and says, well, what did you do to attract them? What did you do to make them follow you? All of a sudden, the blame is on us. And we have done nothing except eat dinner, call our parents, and check into our motel. And quick thinking, he didn't know what our conversation was. I said, Sheriff, my father works for the federal government. Those boys saw my sister on the phone tonight. She was calling because we check in every single night. And when those boys kept driving around the block, whistling and yelling at her, we gave our parents a description of the two cars and the license tag number. And of course, he doesn't know we didn't really do that, but I'm playing dead man's bluff or some kind of poker out here with the sheriff. And I said, if anything happens to us, my parents have that information, and they know. And I said, they probably heard the guys yelling at my sister on the phone even. So they know where we are, and they have a description of the cars and the license tag. And my father is with the government. There will be an investigation if anything happens to us. And he was really nasty to us. I couldn't believe it. So, he was like one of these sheriffs out with Smokey and the Bandit or something. So we get in the car, and I'm thinking, I really don't want to drive out into the desert, with these two cars of guys following us. And luckily, on the other side, which was, as I said, 2 or 3 miles through town, there happened to be a Travelodge, which was one of the first of the motels back in those days that were starting to put a chain out there and have a nice, clean place and a safe place. So by now it's about 10 or 10:30. And we go in, the woman was still there, and I said, we need one room tonight. And I explained to her, I said, give us one room with 2 beds. We're going to stay in the same room because we do not feel safe. And the boys drive up outside the motel. They had the nerve to follow us to this Travelodge. And she recognized them immediately. She said, one of them's father is the largest landowner around here. He's a big rancher, has a lot of power. The other one's father is like the mayor of the town and all. They're troublemakers. They're always getting into things, but nobody does anything about it because their families are too rich and powerful. And I said, yeah, well, I had a feeling they were trouble. So we get in this room, and I said, John, you take one bed, Betsy, you take the other. I'm going to stay up all night and kind of keep guard. And so I did, and I did see a police car sitting outside our room. All night long, I kept looking out that window. But those two cars of guys were there, and finally they left probably about 12 or 1, and they figured we're going to probably leave 7 or 8 the next day. And the police car stayed out there most of the night. But about 4 o'clock, I told Betsy and John, get up. We are leaving because they could follow us tomorrow. We're going to get a head start. They've gone home to sleep off drinking the beer and everything that they had. We're getting the heck out of Dodge or Tucumcari. So we get in the car, and we drove, I don't know how many miles it was. I think it was 1,000 miles that day. We drove all the way from Tucumcari, New Mexico to St. Louis. We were on that old Route 66, and then we had a turnpike, I think, in Oklahoma. And I had a convertible, and at that point, we put the top down on the convertible. It was great out there getting some sun. And we went flying across that. And then I realized you had to have a ticket as you got on this interstate. Well, it wasn't an interstate like we have today, but it was some kind of a big road. But you had to have a ticket. and then you paid when you got off. And I said, they're going to realize I made that trip across pretty quickly. When they check that, I hope they don't check the time on that ticket too carefully. But we made it. We got John to St. Louis. He got his train up to Illinois, and then we spent the night, and then we went on into Lexington the next day. But the moral of the story is, if you're ever in a dangerous situation, try and think fast and somehow make the people think that somebody knows who they might be, that you're not just out there, like no man on an island by yourself, and